If Wi-Fi and a Raspberry Pi had a baby, this is what it would look like. This is the WLAN Pi R4. It's a powerful wireless networking multi-tool based on the open source WLAN Pi OS. This thing's like wireless network monitoring on steroids. It's super easy to set up, and then after install, you've got a network scanner, a speed test device, a client device profiler, Grafana, Kismet, and so much more. This is a fun project, but it's also incredibly powerful. So let's take a look at what WLAN Pi has to offer. WLAN Pi is a multi-tool for wireless network technicians. The WLAN Pi OS can be installed onto a Raspberry Pi with an external antenna for monitoring Wi-Fi 6 or Wi-Fi 7, or with spectrum analyzers for even more detailed stats. You can also buy hardware kits to get you up and running quickly, which is what I did. This kit, by the way, was purchased with my own money. This is not a sponsored video, and in fact, I actually haven't had any contact with the folks at WLAN Pi at all. Since I have multiple Raspberry Pi 4s just lying around waiting for projects, I bought the WLAN Pi R4 Bring Your Own Pi kit for 120 pounds plus shipping. This came out to about 180 bucks USD. In that kit, I received this nice heatsink case with an integrated display screen, as well as a USB Wi-Fi 6 external antenna. They have the external antenna because the Raspberry Pi 4's onboard wireless is only Wi-Fi 5. Now, if you want to go all out, you can buy the WLAN Pi M4, which is a Raspberry Pi CM4 based board with a Wi-Fi 6E module, as well as PoE capability. But for my purposes, the R4 works perfectly fine. Assembling the hardware was pretty straightforward. It took me about 15 minutes or so using this step-by-step instructions. And once completed, I had this gorgeous case ready to go with my Raspberry Pi 4 at the core. Now, they recommend a Raspberry Pi 4 with 2 gigs of RAM or more, and this project does not yet work with the Raspberry Pi 5. So once I had the hardware together, I simply used Balena Etcher to flash the WLAN Pi OS onto a micro SD card, and then everything booted up perfectly. I only have a power cord and an Ethernet cable plugged in. There's no need for a keyboard or mouse or any sort of external display screen. Now, the cool thing about this hardware kit is that most of the functionality you get through the GUI can also be done right on the screen of the device. These 3 buttons down the side are pre-configured as useful shortcuts for seeing the internet connectivity stats, for enabling hotspot functionality, as well as for rebooting the device. The joystick allows you to scroll through the various menu items, and we're going to get to all of that here in a moment. The WLAN Pi R4 can be used for local wireless network monitoring and troubleshooting, but you can also just leave it at a client site for continuous monitoring, as long as you have access to the IP address of the WLAN Pi through VPN, or like with a proxy service such as Tailscale or ZeroTier or Cloudflare tunnels. You can take advantage of the full power of this wireless multi-tool from anywhere in the world. If you use Wi-Fi Scanner on Windows, or if you use Wi-Fi Explorer Pro on Mac, you can set up those applications to use the WLAN Pi as a remote endpoint from your computer. So here we can see that I'm using Wi-Fi Scanner on Windows 10, and I've set up the WLAN Pi as a remote endpoint. So now, Wi-Fi Scanner on my computer is reaching out across the network, or if I have VPN access, it can reach out across the internet and then into the WLAN Pi to use its antenna in order to get information about the wireless spectrum, access points, devices, and all sorts of useful information. And honestly, I could do a whole separate video just on that single use case, but there's a lot more to cover here. Once you've booted the WLAN Pi R4, you can browse to the GUI of the device with HTTP by going to the IP address that's listed on the screen, or by opening up the local domain name that's also listed on the screen. Once you're in the GUI, the first thing you're going to see is a LibreSpeed speed test. If you drop down the speed test menu item, you can also select a more detailed speed test. The next item is the profiler. So when you start the profiler, WLAN Pi fires up a test SSID that you can connect your wireless clients to. The SSID is profiler and then the last 3 digits of the MAC address of your WLAN Pi. You can connect your devices to the wireless SSID with any random string of 8 characters as the password, or you can scan the QR code displayed on the screen of the WLAN Pi. Now, your client device won't actually be able to connect to anything, but once it attempts to connect, it gets profiled, right? And you'll see an indication message on the display screen of the WLAN Pi that's like, hey, profiled new device. So once that's done, we can bring up that device's profile in the GUI, and it's going to tell us a bunch of information about that device, including which wireless bands it's capable of using, whether it supports beamforming, as well as the max transmit power, and a bunch more information. Now, this can be super helpful in troubleshooting why a device isn't behaving properly on your wireless network. So perhaps its antenna isn't powerful enough to get a great wireless signal, or maybe it isn't capable of connecting to the 5 gigahertz wireless and you don't have a 2.4 gigahertz wireless network available. The next menu item is Network, which shows us a ton of information about the network that we're connected to. We can see our ping times out to the gateway and the internet. We've got our public IP information, our Ethernet configuration, as well as some information about our LLDP and CDP network neighbors. Next, we have Kismet. And if you don't know what Kismet is, think of it kind of like Wireshark for Wi-Fi. To activate the Kismet service on the WLAN Pi, select Kismet and then choose Start. Then once it's started, you can click on Launch Kismet and it's going to open that interface in a separate browser tab. Now, Kismet is basically going to show you everything you ever wanted to know about your devices, your access points, and all of the wireless activity that's detected. If you open up the hamburger menu in the top left and you choose Data Sources, you can open up the WLAN 0 interface for the WLAN Pi, and you can actually choose which channels Kismet is scanning. So, for example, if you wanted to bring it down to only the 2.4 gigahertz or only the 5 gigahertz channels. From the main screen, if you click on any individual device, you get a ton of information about that specific device. Now, since Kismet is constantly scanning the wireless airwaves, it actually hits the resources of the Pi pretty hard, which is why you get a message on the screen to remind you that Kismet is running while you have the service started. It can cause the WLAN Pi to warm up quite a bit, which is why it's nice to have this metal case to help dissipate the heat load. Now, moving on, they've also included Grafana, which is what I would use if I was going to leave the WLAN Pi at a client location for any length of time. Let's take a closer look. Okay, so here I have Grafana not running. We're going to say Start. And then now look down here. We've got all of these different pre-configured dashboards that we can fire up. So first I'm going to fire up this one for internet monitoring. Just hit the play button. Then I'm going to fire up one for WLAN Pi Health. That's just basically the CPU, memory, the resources of the WLAN Pi itself. And then if you have like a spectrum analyzer like this Osseum YPri in any of these various bands, there's already a pre-configured dashboard for that tool. Same thing with the MetaGeek YSpy tool as well. So I don't have those tools. They're actually very expensive. So I'm just using what I have. Internet monitoring and WLAN Pi Health are what I'm going to go with. So let's go ahead and open up Grafana in the iframe here. And then once you're logged in, we have this sort of default dashboard that they give you, and you can sort of click through your other dashboards or just come up here to dashboards and pick which one you want. So for example, let's look at the WLAN Pi Health dashboard. Here we can see CPUs at 8%, RAM, CPU utilization and memory over time, and then some temperature stats and things like that. So just very standard resource monitoring that you would use Grafana for. But if I come over here to the internet monitoring dashboard, here I can see information about ping times, response times for DNS resolution, for pinging out to Google. And then these graphs over here, now notice there isn't much information yet because I just fired up the Grafana service. But this will show us our download and upload speed. So it takes periodic speed tests. It's going to show us those speeds over time. Same thing with the latency or the round trip time of packets, as well as our DNS resolution time. So the idea here is that we can turn Grafana on, leave the WLAN Pi at a client location, and then as long as we have IP access to this device, either by remoting into a computer that can get to it, or by a direct VPN connection that gets us into that subnet, we can open up this graphic, this dashboard, and see all of the stats in Grafana. Finally, they've also included Cockpit, which is basically a central control console for Linux-based servers. Now, Cockpit allows us to see all sorts of information about the server, including the storage capacity, networking, user accounts, services. You can also run all of your system updates from Cockpit, and it even has a browser-based terminal so that you don't even have to open up SSH to run commands in Linux. So that's what you can do in the GUI, but there's even more that can be done through the display screen. So let's take a look at that now. Okay, so here we have our display screen. Again, the buttons down the side are pre-configured. So here's our reachability. Basically, what's our latency out to the internet? What's our round trip time to Google? That kind of thing. We can just see at a glance those statistics. The second button here is to turn on a hotspot, because this can act as a local hotspot and bridge through to the Ethernet port of the device and then out onto whatever local network. And then the third button down here is if we want to reboot the device. So we're not going to do that right now, but let's look at the sort of home menu. So we've got network. This shows us information about our interfaces, our wireless interfaces. We can do some configuration. Basically just shows us everything we'd ever want to know about the network that it's connected to. We've got Bluetooth functionality. Now, to be honest, I have not played with any of the Bluetooth functionality in this device yet, but I know that it can do like Bluetooth low energy stuff. Again, I haven't played with it. Inside that menu, we've got status, turn on, turn off, or we can pair devices. I don't know if that's pair devices to this thing or pair this thing to a Bluetooth device. Again, I have not played with it. Then we've got our utilities. So the reachability is that first button that we saw up here in the right-hand side. We've got our speed test that we can run right through the interface. Cloud tests, Aruba Central, Extreme Cloud, Mist Cloud, Ruckus Cloud. So tests out to various services on the internet. We've got a port blinker. What this does is it flaps the RJ45 port, and that'll allow you to locate where this device is on whatever switch it's plugged into. And then we can see USB devices, and we can look through our firewall ports and see what's open. Then we have modes. So we've got Wi-Fi console that allows this to act. Essentially, you can use this as a console to any sort of wireless access point. I believe that's what that's for. We have hotspot, which turns this into an actual hotspot. We have server mode, which means the WLAN Pi can become a DHCP server as well as a TFTP server on the network. Then we've got apps. Kismet, this is where you can turn on those various apps, so you don't have to log into the GUI to turn on Kismet, to turn on the profile, or to turn on the scanner. And then under system, we can see battery. If you have a battery hooked up to this, it somehow interfaces with the battery. Settings such as the RF domain, as well as the time zone, the date and time. Those are things that you have to set up when you initially set up the WLAN Pi. And then, of course, you can reboot and shut it down. So tons of functionality that you get through the display screen of the device without even having to log into the GUI. There is so much that you can do with this WLAN Pi. It's a super fun tool to play with for wireless amateurs and a super powerful tool for wireless veterans. So I've got links to everything down in the description below. Now, these are not affiliate links. Again, I have no association with this project, but they're down there if you want to check them out. And if you'd like to keep this party going, I have hand-selected 2 videos on the right here for you to watch next. The top video is my setup and review of the brand new Starlink Mini satellite dish, and the bottom video is the setup and testing of the absolute cheapest point-to-point wireless bridge that money can buy.